Hi and welcome to It's About Youth, the show that talks about things that matter to youth. I'm Fana Shea. Now on today's episode, we'll be talking about bullying. Bullying is not uncommon here in Malaysia, especially in school settings. We've heard it in the news, we've heard it on social media. There's even shows like Project High Council that depicts instances of bullying in schools. So here to talk more on this is Ain Husniza, from an advocate on making schools a safer place, as well as Bernard Au from PEMIMPIN GSL. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Right, great. Let's just get straight into it because this is a decade-old problem, right? The prevalence of bullying in schools. We've heard about cases in the news or social media, but how severe do you think are these incidents in schools or universities? What's your take on the prevalence of bullying in Malaysia, Bernard?
Right. I think it has always been there, like you said, and it is getting more serious, I think, online and the cyberbullying space, because it is easier for someone to commit these things, right?
Yeah,
they can
definitely.
just comment, they can just get their friends to rally around someone. So I think it has increased, just has evolved into a different form. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Ain, from your experience?
It's definitely proven to be more rife, but also something that I've noticed is that with the movement hashtag Make School a Safer Place and with Project High Council, I think that this culture of bullying, of silence, has always been in our schools, has always been in our education system. But it's only now where people give more attention to it, where now they notice, hey, maybe something like this isn't something normal. It's not something that should be continued or normalized in our society, because I think we have quite a bit of people, even from the older generation, because once I started advocating about it, once I see so many other young teenagers talking about it, then suddenly we see people from the older generation saying, I've experienced worse than that, or benda tu sikit je, or dia panggil, there's one term they call people my age, generasi susu.
Oh, okay.
So actually I think it's always been there, but now what I really like to see is the fact that we've moved forward and started to acknowledge that, hey, this is not something that we should continue.
Yeah. Okay, on that note, right, you know, we've talked about it being a decade-old problem and has always been there, whether or not it goes reported, unreported, whether it's on the social media or not on social media, whether it's online or in schools, everywhere basically. So why do you think it is? Like, is there anyone specifically to blame for this type of instances, or is it more complex that bullying persevere in this kind of settings?
Right.
But,
I think in schools, right, people normally pick teachers as the target because they are supposed to take care of students when they are there. But I think it's more complex than that, because teachers have so many things to do in school, right? When I talk to teachers, they keep highlighting recently that academic, COCO, attendance, and besides that, there are so many stakeholder engagements they have to do. So sometimes it's not easy to carve out time to focus on these things, and these things come out ad hoc, and so sometimes they cannot prepare, allocate time sufficiently to handle these things, and so I think in the end it's a shared responsibility, right? It's not only the teachers, right? Parents should also play a part. They cannot expect the teachers just to take care of the child and educate the child, and they don't do anything at home. It has to come both ways.
yeah. I mean, what do you think about, especially when Bernard mentioned, you know, starting at home, educating at home? Is it something that probably a behavior that is not being cultivated from home, you know, to respect or to treat people nicely, for example?
Although I resonated with what Bernard says, why I believe school especially should be a safe environment for students is not every child will have the privilege of having a good family. We have to acknowledge that. But this is why I agree with what Bernard said, in where we shouldn't put the emphasis on the individual, but we acknowledge the fact that it's also the system. A lot of teachers, they want to voice out, but then they have to be worried about their careers, they have to be worried about, they are human beings too. And a lot of cases where I noticed this, like, ever since I voiced out about what happened to me in school, where a rape joke is not something a teacher should joke about, then other teachers, even though they didn't have anything to do with it, because they were worried and they didn't want to be associated with me, they didn't want to hold the responsibility, they started just alienating me just because of that. So sometimes we need to be, we need to really check back on system, how to make it easy for these perpetrators in the school system to have responsibility and to put accountability on them, because a lot of things in the system stop from the accountability reaching the perpetrator.
Yeah, like you said, it's probably has something to do with school reputation, for example. If you have a lot of cases of bullying, then you're not a good school, for example. That could be one of the issues as well. Now, on bullying, I like when you mentioned generasi susu, was it? This is the first time I'm hearing it. So I'm guessing this is a generasi that is like a bit, how would you describe it? Like,
they say that because we don't want to have prolonged abuse happening to us in school, because we want a conducive environment in school and we don't want for this abuse to continue happening, that we're soft or weak.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's what it's, okay. So I'm getting it right then.
Yeah, I think in the Mandarin context, right, they call it the strawberry generation. Means we're easily squashed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's often being used as well in the younger generation.
I think in Malay, we would just call these people lemak lah, like that, right? Okay, so touching a little bit on that, when we see cases of bullying, for example, where do we actually draw the line? Because in asrama, SBP, for example, most of these cases, right, it's called character building. So it's called, making them tougher to face the real life, because, in the work environment, you're going to face a lot more people that will bully, or not bully per se, that will test you and stuff like that. So where do we draw the line when it comes to bullying and character building, Bernard?
I think we need to differentiate these things, right? So I think there are pranks that students just do to one another, and there are bullyings, and there are traditions as well. A lot of people call these things traditions, right? Like the senior bullying, the junior.
A lot of it in asrama setting,
correct.
right?
And then during birthdays, they would like do pranks on you, sometimes excessively. Do we accept that as tradition, or is that bullying, right? In my opinion, if it causes someone harm, both physically or psychologically, it is bullying. No matter it is a tradition or not, if it causes someone harm, we should not continue that. And I think as we become more aware of these things, right, we need to learn how to differentiate. And as teachers in school as well, we shouldn't accept this thing as it is, especially teachers that seen this tradition go on. We should put a stop to it and encourage only healthy traditions to be passed down to the next generation.
But Ain, so it's very subjective, right? We want to say, okay, physical might be a bit more, you can see with your eyes, but mental is pretty subjective, right? And I think perpetrators would see it as, oh no, I was just trying to it's just for fun, there's not much to it. What do you think, Ain? Where do you actually draw the line when it comes to distinguishing these two?
Because it's very subjective, that's why there needs to be a lot of a check and balance, and in which that, even if someone says that, and they say, I unintentionally, I didn't mean to hurt you, then you should stop that behavior after it's being called out. But in a lot of these situations, after the behavior is called out, after the abusive, the verbal harassment is being called out, they say that they try to justify it. They try to justify the behavior and they continue the behavior. So there's no accountability there. It doesn't stop there, and that's when it becomes bullying. So that's why we need to have policies even in schools so that teachers know what to do. And if I can come back earlier to around the few first questions where we asked where's the responsibility to be put on these incidents of bullying in schools, is that sometimes even though, for example, teachers or students, they want to do something, they don't know what to do. There's no policies in place, no step-by-steps. And I think that having these policies in place help stop the incidents of bullying before it ever happened, and stops from new victims from, it's not just about the fact, when there's a victim, then we address it. We address it before there's a victim.
Yeah, so tackling the root cause of the problem before it even begins. Now, Ain, I'm interested to know an added layer of severity to these bullying cases is when it involves sexual harassment, especially in school setting. It's very it's disgusting. It's not at all it's just horrifying to me, be it among boys or among girls, right? And from your experience voicing out on such cases, voicing out on something that has happened to you, what came out of it? Did the bullying or the bullying per se or the sexual harassment cases get picked up more, or do people voice out more things to you, for example? What came out of you voicing out?
Since we're talking around in a school setting, and I want to talk about what happened to me as a result of voicing out inside my school previously, which was that at first my friends supported me on what was going on, told me to make a police report, but I noticed for some reason quite after I made the police report, they started posting status about me, alienating me, insulting me, and I believe it was because of the pressure of the whole school environment, in which that during that time my headmistress was against me, my teachers were against me, and suddenly my friends, the other students, my other classmates were also against me. And this showed that sometimes that this bullying is also because of like even the mob mentality that's going on in school, even though sometimes they think that it's not right, and there's like enablers too, which I don't think that's right, but they don't do anything to stop it. So this is why during that time I had to move schools because I was already given a warning letter of expulsion. So that's where a lot of the responsibility when you voice out about the bullying that you go through inside school goes more to the victim rather than to the actual perpetrator.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm saddened to hear that you had to go through all that, but I think one thing that we can both say that something good did came out of you voicing out, in that you created a movement where a lot more people are more brave and more vocal about the things that they experience in school. So I think that's what we're going to stop right now. We're going to continue on with this topic after this break. Hi and welcome back to It's About Youth. Today I'm joined by Ain Husniza, an advocate for making schools a safer place, as well as Bernard Au from PEMIMPIN GSL. Now, today we're talking about bullying. And from what we discussed just now, reporting bullying or even sexual harassment per se, these cases, usually we see a lot more that goes unnoticed. So, yeah, we've seen a lot on social media and on the news, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot more that goes unreported or we don't know about. Bernard, from a teacher or authoritative point of view, right? Why is that so? Are there enough safe avenues for reporting?
Right. I think just to give a caveat, so I was a teacher, but currently I only work with teachers, so I'm not on the ground per se. But I think I think there's a few issues on why this goes undetected, right? I think number one, just now Ain also said, sometimes students are not sure what to do when these things happen. So I think number one, I believe that the system is in place, but the system is not effective. So I think it is not effective, and it's also not clearly communicated to the students on how they should do it. I feel like teachers or school leaders need to highlight this, especially during the orientation period, and highlight this on a seasonal sort of basis so that everyone knows what to do when it happens. Like when bullying happens, they already know who they need to go to. And besides highlighting this clearly, it's also to ensure that it is effective. Whoever that is handling this discipline teacher roles or counselor teacher roles needs to be really effective. So in order to really ensure that these cases are being taken care of. But then there's two other things I want to highlight. But before that, I want to go into the teacher bit, right? I think it's difficult to expect the discipline teacher and the counselor to only handle these cases, because there's the ratio of one counselor teacher to 500 students in a school, and it's really difficult for the counselors to do that. So I think ideally every teacher should provide that safe space for students who are going through, like who went through these things, right? To voice out, and besides the safe space, they need to ensure that their identities are also protected. They are not victimized even more after this, right? And I think besides that, there's also, I think, the culture of protecting the victim, of helping people who is being bullied, is also something that we need to cultivate in schools. And I feel like this is something that we do not enough, right? I think when I was a teacher, the culture of jangan buka aib orang is very common. But I think there's a line to that. When this causes harm to another person, that's where we need to speak up. It's not about buka aib anymore. This is about someone's safety. already. Yeah.
And we've seen from the instance that you give just now how people sort of victimize you for speaking out, right? From a student perspective. Why do you think reporting is very difficult?
I have my own experience with that.
Yeah.
I directly reported it to my counselor.
Right.
I thought the thing is, in schools, when you're a student, they have this sort of saying where they say the counselor is the last teacher that you should trust with. Yeah. And
Okay.
can you imagine how unbelievable it is that the counselor, their role to provide a safe space to student, to provide counseling to student, has that kind of reputation in school, that they are the last people that you should trust, because once you tell them your stories, your problem, the next day the whole school will know. That is a common consensus that goes out through Malaysian schools. But when I told about my problem to my counselor, he said that it was just another way that the teacher was teaching, a pedagogy as he called it, and that I was just sensitive because I was a girl. And this is actually something very common that counselor teachers send out. They send these pamphlets on how girls' thinkings are different than boys, and that was what he was regurgitating back to me during that time. And he was trying to silence me, and when I asked him, can you please do something about it? He said, what do you want me to do about it? So this is my own personal experience trying to report in school with a counselor, and the general idea that goes around the role of counselors in school, which is when we want to say, oh, we should provide a safe space for students to report or for their mental health in schools. We have counselors, but on the ground, how are they actually going through their roles? How are they actually providing for these students? And it seems to not really provide the best for our students.
And I think that's why what Ain is doing is very important. Like keep the school teachers accountable, right? I think the accountability system, once it's strong, only then people are willing to use the system, right? Currently, if we cannot trust these counselors, then who can we go to? So I think keeping us accountable is very important, and thank you so much for doing that. And actually, I hope more people could become like Ain, that to really voice out when something is wrong. I think essentially that is lacking in our society. Right?
Okay, so talking more of a top-bottom approach here, there's been several initiatives by the government, not just by this government, government after government. There's always an anti-bullying campaign or an anti-bullying program at the government level, and then they said, we're going to disseminate it to all the schools, for example, you name it. But what's really missing in this fight against bullying or even sexual harassment per se? Why do we still see a prevalence of bullying in school? Are these not effective, or are they not well executed? So what's missing here? Ain, if you can go first.
Personally, for me, sometimes what happens on top, which is policies, and they already have counselors in school, but then on ground we don't really see how it can perform, how it can serve the students. So sometimes there's this lack of communication between the stakeholders and also the policymakers, where they draft a bill, but then when it's passed, when it's in practice, then suddenly it doesn't provide its purpose, it doesn't serve its purpose. So I believe we should definitely give voice to, and policymakers need to interact with stakeholders, students, and to make sure what is really wrong, and then ask them why can't they trust the counselor? How can they how can the counselor serve them better? Have confidentiality every time they tell a problem to the counselor, or have a step-by-step on what counselors should do if a student report a bullying problem to them. So we need to make sure that there's not only policies, but it needs to be a comprehensive policy that covers every aspect, to make sure there's no loopholes, just like this, that we have a counselor, but they're not serving their roles good enough.
So going on the ground and relaying that information and guideline well. Bernard, what's your take on this?
Right. I think that there's a few things. Number one, I want to reiterate the sort of teacher burden, beban cikgu juga. Sometimes they don't have much time to really look into these things. I think there are teachers that really care about these issues, but they don't have time. But I also want to acknowledge there are also bad apples within the system that is often being passed around, even though they have done something, in my opinion, not supposed to be done by a teacher, but they're still in the system. In my opinion, that's also another big issue that no one really wants to talk about, keeping these bad apples around, where they are no longer technically safe to be teaching kids. Right. So besides the sort of teacher issue, I feel like it's also a cultural issue. I think we need to have the culture of it takes a village to raise a child, where everyone needs to participate in a children's development, and as someone's sibling, as someone's cousin, elder cousin, we should check on them and ask, hey, how is the school experience going? And if it's not going well, we should be able to identify these things and help them to troubleshoot it. Currently, these programs are effective. I think some of these programs that I've heard, like Stand Together, is really effective, but they are something that is seasonal, and I don't think right now they are doing it anymore. What needs to stay is the culture of taking care of one another, culture of protecting one another when things go wrong, is something that I think is still a bit lacking in our society. So there are a lot of people that are willing to help, but sometimes they're the silent majority. Right.
Yeah.
So instilling this kind of values from the
Yes.
start.
But I do have my own experience
Right.
with the teacher burden thing, because in my school, sometimes the teacher is not only the teacher for the subject of computer science, but also physical education, but also discipline teacher, and they hold a lot of roles. They sometimes handle the clubs or delegate the the celebrations in the school, so they hold a lot of burden. I do agree with that, but that's why that when policymakers draft things, they need to keep this in mind. So who are playing the counselors actually? Are they teachers in the workforce currently, or maybe it's better to have from outside NGOs to provide unbiased counseling towards the students? So these are the things that we need to keep in mind in drafting these policies.
That's good. Now, legislation such as Anti-Sexual Harassment Act that goes into place has been groundbreaking in pushing the conversation forward and making sure that victims get the justice that they deserve, right? Should we be looking into a specific bill per se for bullying too, and what should be in it?
I think broadly speaking, that sounds like something that brings, definitely positive effects on this issue. But I think currently there are already laws that highlight what are the offenses against someone who bully one another. So, but before talking about the law, I want to emphasize on the importance of having a clear processes first. Because in order for a law to happen, you need to have these frameworks done first, or else after you implement the law, it's going to be very messy, just like I think what I mentioned just now. So having clear processes and ensure that everyone knows the processes, especially the students, so when things happen, they know where to go to, is a priority.
Okay. What about you, Ain? Should we look into, because when we come to the anti-sexual harassment, there's also punishment for perpetrators, for example, ways for people to take more accountability. Should that be put into an anti-bullying legislation?
Yeah, and I do believe that we also, just like what you said earlier, the fact that what bullying is very vague. The idea is very subjective, and I believe that we should also provide definition to what bullying is in the bill. And if I'm not mistaken, there's already a couple of NGOs working together with one uni, if I can't really remember correctly, but they're already working on an anti-bullying bill. But I definitely resonate with what Bernard said earlier, the fact that the people needs to know the processes, which is that it's not just policymakers, rasa short sendiri tulis draft bill lepas tu, people don't really know what's going on, or they don't even know the existence of the act sometimes. So, because for example, recently in Parliament, we already have the Sexual Offences Against Children Act, and right now they're doing amendments even to the Act, so that they can make it better, improvise, and make it even more comprehensive. So we always need to have these improvisations towards the bill to make sure that it's up to date and not lacking anymore.
Stands the test of time. Now, we only have unfortunately one more question left, as we're short of time. In whatever that we've talked about just now, fighting the culture of bullying, be it whatever we want to categorize it, including sexual harassment and all that, where does it start? How do we begin? And how can people like you and me get more involved, Bernard?
Right. I think we as a society need to care more for our students. As parents, find out how did their school went. How what are the challenges they face. And as a society, we can do that to our younger sibling, younger cousin, maybe a student. This is something that we need in order for them to thrive in school. And if they need someone to talk to, they can talk to us. If we can all start doing this, right, it will be much easier for the victims to voice out.
What about you, Ain? Last words.
We are not all policymakers, we are not all legislative makers, we are just individuals, sometimes we are students, and I believe that there's a certain responsibility, just like Bernard said, that we need to take on, because a lot of times, sometimes there's only one bully, but there's a lot more bystanders and enablers. So we need to stop and start really addressing these problems. When you see it's happening to other people, acknowledge it and protect the victim rather than just letting it be like, it's not my problem, it's not my issue. And that's how a lot of bullying problems continue on. It's just, I didn't think it was anything. I think it was just normal teasing, but actually it was bullying. So we as a person, individual, need to start actively taking roles into making sure that these cultures are not continued in either school or even workplaces.
There you go. That wraps up our topic on bullying. There's plenty more to cover, but unfortunately we're short of time. I think the one thing that we can take from this is the fact that we need to play a more active role into fighting this culture of bullying, and that we cannot be bystanders, and we need to think of more comprehensive framework to address this issue. I'm Farnashe. Thank you for watching.